Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 135 of the Hammer Territory podcast. I'm your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Saturday afternoon, ? And I'm joined, as I often / always am, by Scott Coleman. Scott, how are you here in mid-January?
Hey, Brad, I'm doing really well. It is about 60 degrees where I am, but it sounds like you and a lot of the fine folks in your neck of the woods have had some pretty bad winter storms, and I don't know, maybe I did grow up in the Midwest, so I am used to some snow and some cold, but it's been a long time, at least for me, since I've gotten to enjoy some of maybe the fun side of winter.
Yeah, I mean, Atlanta got like 4 inches of snow in one day, and that is a lot for here. I have family from the Midwest as well, and people would make fun of us for this, and I get it. But when you aren't set up to deal with the weather strikes you a lot harder. Like the Hawks had a game, as we're talking right now, actually on Saturday afternoon, they got postponed today because people just can't get to the arena. So it's one of those things where it can be fun, lots of snow. It can also be kind of funny if you're from the north. I understand that too, but here we are and living the dream here on a Saturday afternoon. We should say at the top of the show, we should always
I
do.
did
Go ahead.
like, sorry, Brett, I was going to say, I did like Blooper walking naked through Tourist Park.
I forgot
That was
about
good.
that.
Yeah, it's the man. When the Braves first announced Blooper, I was like, okay, this is kind of dumb. It's obviously for like 7-year-olds at the ballpark, but through social media and just kind of growing that brand of Blooper, I mean, talk about hitting a home run from a marketing and fan engagement perspective. I don't know what Blooper is pretty awesome.
Yeah, they do a great job with maximizing what that could have been. So I'm actually with you on that one. It's like kind of not for me, but they do a very good job on social media with these bits that he does. And if you didn't see it, for folks listening or watching the podcast, Blooper just was like frolicking in the snow at Truist, which was certainly fun to watch. So find that on Twitter or Instagram if you'd like to. We should say on top of the show, as we always do, we are part of Foul Territory. So check out the entire network of podcasts. If you're just finding us for the first time, we are Hammer Territory. It's myself and Scott, plus Stephen Tolbert and Sean Coleman. We cover the Braves year-round, whether they're doing anything or not, which is certainly of note right now when they're not doing anything, and they haven't been for quite some time. But please subscribe to our podcast anywhere you find your podcasts, audio side plus YouTube. And we had 2 fun shows last week, actually. Justin Toscano of the AJC talked to Scott and I. That was a fun conversation about a week ago. Justin's great. And then Grant McCauley, our friend from all kinds of places around the internet. Grant has like 3, 4, 5 different jobs. He's like kind of like me, but even more. Married a Daily Journal. He has his own podcast. Anyway, Grant was on with Steven and Sean. Fun conversation there. So listen to those. They're still very relevant right now because nothing much has changed, Scott. I know. I'm not sure if you've been mining the content mines recently, but breaking news, everybody. No transactions of note in the last few days.
It has been very quiet. Really 2 players, Brad, since maybe the last time you and I did a show have signed over the last couple of days. And I mean, maybe we'll just talk about him right now. Justin Verlander, who there was a little bit of smoke with Justin Verlander on the internet. I never know how much to believe that smoke, but Verlander signed with the San Francisco Giants 1 year, $15 million, which as we in these parts say, that is the Charlie Morton special 1 for 15. And then Jeff Hoffman, who we had talked about a few times on the podcast in the last couple of months, ended up signing with Toronto for 3 years, $33 million. And there was also some drama with Hoffman that I guess we should probably hit on because maybe if folks haven't caught the news the last couple of days, there was quite a bit with those 2 pitchers.
Yeah, I remember asking you on the show about Verlander, and you made a very funny face. I don't think you were very interested in Justin Verlander. Is that accurate to say, Scott? You were not enthused by that necessarily, if that had been a possibility?
No, not really. I mean, I think I said on the show that if he was willing to pitch for like $5 million or $6 million for, just for fun at this point, because he's made a lot of money, then sure. But for $15 million for a team that is somewhat strapped for money or hasn't been willing to spend basically anything all winter long, I think you have to aim higher than Verlander at age 42.
Yeah, we're on the same page there. But yeah, you're right. Hoffman's much more interesting. I think we all, probably the 4 of us all said at some point, like he'd be very interesting on the Braves. He got compared to Ronaldo Lopez in that he's been a reliever, but one that could start, and he might be available for a reliever contract and be able to start, which is pretty appealing for different teams. he actually ends up signing a deal with Toronto that gives him a lot of incentives as innings escalator. So basically, if he ends up starting, he'll get more money, which makes sense. He's worth more at that point in time. But you alluded to it. Robert Murray reported this, that Hoffman actually agreed to a 3-year, $40 million deal with Baltimore, but they flagged his medical somewhere and pulled the offer. So he gets a soft landing spot at 3 for 33 in Toronto. But, we always say this on the show, like, not all deals are created equal. We don't know if he would have signed the same deal with the Braves. And with this medical thing, especially on a pitcher, you don't want to overreact to it because all pitchers have medical stuff. Like, it's a risky thing to be doing with your arm. But if a team that needed pitching, as Baltimore does, flags him enough where they wouldn't sign him, that means there was at least something to be worried about with Jeff Hoffman's arm. We don't know anything beyond that, at least that I've seen. But it's worth at least acknowledging that because, look, everyone had the same reaction to this in Braves country. Like, man, another guy the Braves could have signed to a pretty reasonable contract that didn't come. I had the same reaction to everybody. I promise you that. But maybe the medical was at least part of why.
Yeah. When I saw it come across that Jeff Hoffman had signed for 3 years and $33 million, I tweeted it. I was like, man, this is one of the few deals all winter that I would have happily had the Braves sign. It feels reasonable at $11 million a year for a very, very good reliever. Of course, as you noted, about 20 minutes later, Robert Murray, friend of the network, Robert Murray, dropped a nugget that Baltimore failed Hoffman on medicals. And if you're committing 3 years to a pitcher, you better be damn sure that that elbow and that shoulder are sound. And if there was already concern today, and you're going to be married to this guy for the next 1,000 days, roughly, I mean, all it takes is one pop of that elbow in the spring, and you're suddenly losing him, not just for one of those 3 years, but possibly a year and a half. So I'm curious if the Braves ever got interested or involved with Hoffman. We've heard interest in guys like Tanner Scott and Carlos Estevez this winter as well. So I'm guessing the Braves probably checked in on Hoffman, especially if he is in that hybrid type of mold. But nonetheless, he's now with the Blue Jays, and they will hold their breath that he holds up physically for the next 3 seasons.
Yeah, another one bites the dust, so they say. We'll see. We still have our list of guys that we're interested in for the Braves, and of course, Alex is prone to going off of everyone's list sometimes, so we will see. But that was one that certainly was newsworthy in the last couple of days. One more thing that was actually newsworthy as well: the Braves settled their pre-arbitration, back and forth with both Jared Kelenic and Dylan Lee in the day, maybe / hours before the deadline. If you don't know, like, once guys could go to arbitration, it's like they have one more chance to kind of settle before things go. There's a deadline anyway, but they're both pretty cheap. Kelenic signs for $2.3 million, Lee for about $1.025 million. Obviously, Dylan Lee at that price is an absolute and utter heist. He's a very good reliever, but that's the thing with cheap relief pitching, guys that are not free agents yet. That's what you're going to get. That was around the projections on both guys. The impact of this is very low. Like, even if they had gone to arbitration, they were not going to suddenly owe Dylan Lee $5 million. It wasn't going to happen that way. It would have been a very small difference. But I just tend to take the drama out of it. Even if you've got to pay a guy an extra few $1,000, like, sign me up for that. And yeah, Kelenic, even look, as I almost said bad, as underwhelming as Kelenic was last year, for $2 million, like, okay, it's fine.
Yeah. And this feels like an important year ahead for Kelenic, just on his own, like, personal level. Guy, I believe it's now going to be his 4th year in the majors. Of course, he had some injuries with Seattle and wasn't always up with the big league club, but he's getting to that point in his career where he's no longer a young man. He's well beyond his prospect status. And you said it perfectly a moment ago. It was an underwhelming first season. I think there was enough from Kelenic that you can kind of dream on it and say, hey, man, if he can tap into the player he was in June and early July and come even close to doing that over a full season, you're talking about potentially a really solid player. But if it's just more the same for Kelenic, and we're going to talk about how much he's going to ultimately play here in a little bit, if it's more the same, if Kelenic gets 400 plate appearances next season between filling in the gaps with Acuna, or if Harris gets hurt, or maybe he's the starting left fielder for most of the season, if it's more of the same for Kelenic, I think in a year's time, it's probably time to have the conversation of, this is who he is. High prospect and draft capital be damned. He's just not very good. I hope we don't have to have that conversation. I hope he causes the Braves to have a problem that's not a problem because he's performing so well that they're trying to figure out how many players they're going to get into the lineup that night. But yeah, procedural with Kelenic and with Lee, but hopefully both those guys have good and healthy seasons ahead of them.
Yeah, we might already be there with Kelenic too. Like I know a lot of Braves people that I think are smart that are kind of like giving up on Kelenic as a high end guy. I'm not saying I'm quite there. I do understand that, but I think maybe he'll be in he's going to be on the team and he'll be in a real role of some kind, whether he's starting, fourth outfielder or whatever. They haven't given up on him yet, and we'll see how that goes. But certainly, even if he is a fourth outfielder, $2 million, totally fine, and we'll see how that goes. All right, we do have more of the news and notes to get to, and later on in this podcast, your mailbag questions, a couple interesting ones that we'll dive into. First, though, word from our partners on the podcast.
As an athlete, I care about what I put in my body, especially when it comes to protein. But can we also get some protein that tastes good? Come on, it's 2025.
Todd, that's why this podcast is sponsored by Orgain. Orgain believes real nutrition has the power to make a real difference in people's lives, and it tastes so good. Orgain's new 30-gram complete protein shakes offer protein-packed real nutrition designed to satisfy your cravings without any added sugar. They're also an excellent source of premium ultra-filtered protein with all 9 essential amino acids.
FT loves Orgain, and you'll often see it on the desk in the studio as we fuel up before and during the show. We love it for muscle support, recovery, and more.
Remember, there are no quick fixes when it comes to your health. If you want more protein, give Orgain 30-gram protein shakes a try. Head to Orgain.com/FOUL30 and use code FOUL30 for 30% off your order. That's the best offer you'll find, but you have to use the code FOUL30 for 30% off.
All right, Scott, let us get into the rest of the news and notes. This is a very quick one, I think. The Braves signed 34-year-old infielder Eddie Alvarez to a minor league contract. No emergency podcast this time, Scott, but do you have anything on this at all, or should we just move on?
When he gets a walk-off hit in the World Series 9 months from now, we will sing Eddie Alvarez's praises forever. But no, I have no takes on a 34-year-old utility man who will probably be in spring training for 3 weeks and then get cut.
Yeah, or just being Gwinnett for the duration. It's a minor league deal. It is what it is. But I would say when Brian De La Cruz is extremely more interesting than this signing, which I think is true. That's a low bar to clear, but we cleared it. Anyway, not great. And just another non-transaction to discuss really on the podcast. Shouts to Eddie Alvarez, though. I'm sure he's a nice man. Moving forward, there was an interesting interview that Alex Anthopoulos gave. So I am local, of course, in Atlanta, and people were kind of wondering why he did this, because Alex doesn't like to talk to the media. My best guess, pretty informed, is that he probably had to contractually do this interview because it was with the Braves flagship radio station, i.e. they have a contract with the team, they cover the team, etc. It's 680 The Fan here in Atlanta. And Alex did 25 minutes? It was a pretty long interview with their midday crew this week. And didn't make a ton of news. He made some interesting-ish comments. There was not one bombshell. This didn't go national or viral. But Scott, you listened to it. I mean, we could dive in what he said, not the entire thing, because it was not all super interesting, but he made a couple of waves that are at least interesting enough for us to discuss on the podcast.
Yeah, it's funny. This is now, I think, the 7th offseason with the Braves and Alex Anthopoulos. Maybe 8th, actually, because it's been 7 seasons and he joined just before the 2018. So this is now 8 off seasons with Alex Anthopoulos running the show. If I had to blindly guess what was going to be said based on the questions on that interview with Alex, I probably could have gotten about 90% of it.
Yep.
And that's not me boasting. I think anyone who pays attention to Alex over the years, he is extremely well media trained. You will ask him a question about a certain position, and within 5 seconds of his answer, he is deflecting and talking about the team as a whole and talking about how they don't just shop for one position, but for the whole team, and how they're not just looking at this season, but how that player fits beyond just 2025. And he does his Alex Anthopoulos thing, and he's very media savvy. But there were a couple of talking points that we're going to hit on here that, at least as I was listening to it, went, oh, okay, we should talk about that on the podcast.
Yeah, so one of them is Ian Anderson, who Steven and I kind of stumbled into talking about for like 10 minutes the other day on the podcast about how he's out of options. And that gives you a sense of urgency with a pitcher. It means that you kind of have to have him in a role on opening day, or you can't have him in a run anymore. You're going to have to DFA him. It's this very interesting dance the Braves might have with Ian. And I say might for a reason. They might just keep him and have him in a role or whatever, but they might have to shop him. And I think we agree on that podcast. He would be a pretty logical trade candidate because he might have more value to another team that might just be like, hey, Ian, you're our fourth starter coming into the season. The Braves probably can't do that with him. Now, with that said, Alex acknowledged that. He did say on the interview that he just wasn't ready to pitch in the majors last year, which is pretty candid. I think it was obviously true, given how much the Braves had to go into the depth of their rotation and never went to him at any point last year. But the one that got me, Scott, was that he threw him in there as a bullpen candidate. Now, that is new in that I looked this up twice today to make sure I wasn't crazy. Alex, I don't believe Ian has ever thrown a pitch at any professional level out of the bullpen. He has started everywhere he's ever been, on the way up in the minors, in Atlanta, and then back in the minors the last couple of years. So it doesn't mean he can't be a reliever, but he's never struck me as a reliever profile necessarily. He's always kind of been a more crafty, multiple pitches kind of guy. Doesn't mean he can't be a reliever and couldn't scale up, maybe throw a little bit harder, all those things. But what did you make of Alex saying that?
So, if we're assuming that Ian Anderson is going to be on the roster come opening day, and that's a moderately large assumption.
Yeah.
Because he is out of minor league options. So again, he has to be on the big league roster unless he gets hurt. You can put him on the injured list. But I also think there's probably a small chance the Braves could trade Ian over the next month or even in spring training if Alex is right about maybe free agency lingers longer than usual and goes into spring training to finalize a few things. But with Ian Anderson, I'm curious as to what the Braves feel internally that he's going to be allowed to provide. I do think that as he's now 6 more months removed from his elbow surgery from the end of the regular season to today, it's only going to help Ian out. Generally, for pitchers, the farther they distance themselves from elbow surgeries, the better they are. Their velocity returns, the command gets better. I think command is probably the biggest thing or biggest hurdle for pitchers coming off elbow surgery. So I think that clearly we have seen at times that Ian can be a quite good pitcher in the major leagues. I'm guessing, if I had to make some kind of a guess today, and this actually ties in with the mailbag question a little bit later, if I had to guess, I'm wondering, unless Ian just gets completely blown up in the spring, I'm wondering if the Braves are going to give him kind of like a last chance in the rotation to see if he can stick as a 5th or even a 6th man in the rotation. And if he's good, then amazing, problem solved. You've added a good starting pitcher. And if he's not as good, then I could see the Braves shifting Ian to the bullpen, maybe once Spencer Strider comes back or whatever the circumstance is, and then seeing if he can cut it in the bullpen. Maybe he's better there. Maybe he can up his fastball from like the mid 90s to upper 90s if he's only throwing 15 pitches at a time. Maybe the breaking stuff will be sharper. Maybe he'll be more effective because he's only going to see hitters 1 time instead of 2 or 3. But an interesting player, kind of a wild card player for the Braves in 25 is Ian Anderson. And it was interesting that Alex at least came out and said they are thinking internally that if there's just no other way to put him on the roster than in the bullpen, then they'll do it as at the risk of putting him through waivers, and almost certainly somebody would claim him.
Yeah, it really comes down to if you don't trade him, you have to be at least willing to consider him in the bullpen. And for me, it doesn't mean you have to put him there, but he has to be it has to be on your board of options, or else you probably can't keep him because of just the math game that they have. We went into it a little bit with Steven too, but yeah, I'm intrigued by that. I don't know if it's going to happen. They do have a guy in Grant Holmes who's been more of a reliever that ended up starting last year. I think he has a profile that's more of a reliever than Ian does. Those guys maybe complement each other a little bit. We'll see. But I think that, your idea there of just okay, Ian, you get 6 weeks, basically. You get 4 or 5 turns through the rotation. We'll see what happens. I wouldn't be shocked by that either if they get there in spring training. Or if he looks bad in spring, if he shows up in February, they're like, all right, Ian, we don't really see it. Maybe you DFA him, or maybe you try to shop him in a trade for very little or whatever to just clear the roster spot. So we'll see. That was kind of the biggest newsy one, at least for me. The other things were like Acuna and Strider, he all but confirmed are not going to be on the opening day roster. We kind of knew that already, but Alex was pretty candid by his standards, I thought, around Acuna. Basically just being careful with him, noting the past, like how it took him a long time to get back to his like peak self the last time. I don't know. It wasn't like a massive news story, Scott, but like I thought it was at least like, hey, pretty matter of fact, like we're not going to rush Ronald, and here are the reasons why, kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, Alex alluded to the fact that this knee tear for Acuna happened in late May, and the one in 2021 was mid-July. It was about 6 weeks of difference. So just because there's 6 extra weeks, if you will, built in for Acuna's recovery, it felt like the Braves and the medical staff are pretty set in stone that they are not going to rush Ronald back in any way, shape, or form. They want to give him more than the 9 months of recovery time that he pretty much had between tearing his knee in 21 and then when he was starting to really play in 22. And that makes sense because it's just worth quickly reminding folks that even though he was an ungodly MVP, best player in the world in 2023, Ronald struggled a bit, at least for his standards. He was still better than like 75% of the league playing on a knee that was not 100%. And maybe mentally Ronald didn't fully trust that knee when he came back from the surgery. But he was not the superstar that we love so much. And if it means that you have to give him a few extra weeks at the start of the year so he can really build up strength and shake off the rust and all of that, it's something you have to do. You want to talk about storylines for this upcoming season, the health of Ronald Acuna Jr. and Spencer Strider, but especially in my mind, Acuna is really what's going to determine just how good this team can be. And if you got to play it safe at the start, then you do it. And you just hope you get more of a 23 Acuna than a 22 Acuna whenever he starts to play every day.
For sure. We're aligned there. And, having that guy, the outfield instability that they have, it's just Harris and Acuna of guys that they're comfortable with right now. Kelenic's kind of the third guy, and we'll see. But yeah, you want to have the best version of Ronnie. I understand that there are fans that I've seen say like, other things other than being careful with Ronnie, like all the things you see, he makes a lot of money. You got to play. I get it. But like when you're that guy and he's your best player and he still is the best player, you want to have him be ready. And we'll probably do this later in the spring about whether Ronnie is going to run anymore. All of the questions about like, stolen bases are sometimes overrated in general as far as their value is concerned, but Ronnie may not run anymore or may not run as much anymore as he did. And that's maybe something we could discuss with some nuance later on. But yeah, I back the Braves on this one. I think that's the right decision to be careful with him. He's your best player. And, him being out for an extra 3 weeks is not going to, be a disaster if he's back in himself or more likely to be himself when he actually returns.
Yeah. And Alex also confirmed or seconded or whatever word you want to use that Spencer Strider should have a pretty normal spring training.
Which he said, to your point.
Yeah. Strider on Corey Kluber's podcast, a couple of weeks ago now. Strider said he expects to have a normal spring. Alex said that they're expecting Strider to have a pretty normal spring. And that's good news. We won't know for sure. I mean, I think we're going to be holding our breath every day and hoping that the velocity stays strong and that Spencer is healthy and the elbow feels good. But again, encouraging to the fact that it feels like it's going to be a fairly normal ramp-up period for Strider. And then we just have to hope that he's healthy for most of the season and is able to debut relatively early, especially in a rotation that has quite a few questions right now.
Yeah, he's a freak, which I mean in the best possible way about Strider. So hopefully that benefits him in his rehab. But yeah, they'll be careful with him too, as it should be. I guess the last thing we could mention about Alex's interview is that this is not a surprise, kind of some fan service, I would say. He was kind of given a layup about whether the Braves would be having something big coming potentially in the next couple of weeks and months. And Alex pretty clearly said yes to that, although he did it in a very Alex way. He couched it like got to be the right move available, all those things. I don't care about this, Scott. We could also make fun of the fact that he was asked about moving Ozuna to the outfield again. And what was the other thing? I think it was Alex Bregman being signed and putting Riley back in left field, something like that.
Yeah.
Some off the wall, not very practical questions, but Alex did a very Alex thing here and just said, "Hey, doors open, everybody." Which is, look, I think that's probably true, but also, what do you take from that? Not much. I don't know.
I think clearly Alex Anthopoulos cares just as much about 25 as he cares about 26 and 27 and 28.
Yeah.
And we could probably have a really long, deep debate over if that is how a general manager should operate. On one hand, it's a what have you done for me lately sport, and you want to win the World Series and win the division and all of that every single year. And sometimes you have to put a little chips into the middle of the table in order to try to make that happen, even if you are taking on risk that then down the road, maybe you then don't have as many chips to push in whenever you need help. But I think if we have known anything from Alex after 7 years, he is incredibly cautious. He's very calculated with his moves. And it's funny, for a guy who can talk for half an hour and say a bunch of nothing, I did kind of believe him in his answer that if the right mega deal came along tomorrow, they would say yes to it. But I'm just not sure that mega deal is going to be out there at this point when it's a month, basically, a little more than that, until pitchers and catchers show up.
I also believe him, and I also think that it's very silly that a lot of fans, and I get why people say this, a lot of fans are like saying that Alex is just doing nothing. Like, I can promise you he's not just chilling. Alex Anthopoulos is kind of a maniac. I've heard many times people behind, and not in a bad way, but like he wants his team to be as good as it can be. I don't think he's taking much time off. He might have taken Christmas Day off. It's one of those things. Like, if you're a high-level baseball executive, you have that gene in you where you are very competitive and you are not just chilling. I can assure you of that. Now, we don't have to agree with the methods. I'm not telling you that you do. And you're right. There is that discussion to be had about whether there should be more urgency right now, given the way the core is locked up. You could say that gives you a long runway, but also could say, hey, you could say the other way, like, hey, it's time to go ahead and go win with this core before they start getting older and before they start getting less team control, all those things. But I do think that Alex, I believe him too. Long story short, I think that he is willing to do something. Justin said it. I think Grant said it too. I think that something's going to happen. I don't think still, yes, it's January 11th as we're talking now. I still don't believe the Braves are going to do nothing between now and opening day. I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe it is. It's non-zero. When you're this late in the game, it's not a 0% chance that the Braves do nothing this winter, but I think that they're still going to do something, and we'll evaluate that when it happens, I suppose.
Yeah, there's still money. It's TBD just how much money they're going to spend. But even if they are going to be cheap asses and dodge the luxury tax, there's still like $20 million that they can spend this winter. I think you and I have made our point clear over the last couple of podcasts. Spend the damn money. It's not our money. You're printing cash. Truist is packed. The battery is packed. You're in a World Series window. All of that. But I would agree with our guests on the pod the last couple of days that if they do truly nothing, I would be shocked. And I guess we'll see. They have about a month. And if there is nothing after a month, Brad, we will do our now almost infamous hypothetical show. But I still don't think we're going to have to do that episode at the end of the day.
All right, Scott, let us get into the mailbag because we've exhausted our Alex Anthopoulos takes for one day. Question from Tucker, who says, should the Braves think about a 6-man rotation this season? And then he says, I know it's hard to even find 5 starters. Yes, it is. But I've read a couple things about Alex Snit liking to keep guys fresh. So before I throw it to you, I will back up the question. That is correct. The Braves did a lot of things last year to keep, in particular, Chris Sale and Ronald Lopez as fresh as possible because Sale's old and injury plagued in previous years. Lopez had been a converted reliever, all that said. So does that mean 6-man rotation is a guarantee? No, but this is a pretty interesting idea, Scott. And I know something you want to talk about at some point anyway. Yeah. So here we are.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, would the Braves go to a 6-man rotation next season? You mentioned they gave Sale and Lopez in particular every rest day imaginable. I say that as somebody who had baseball tickets to see Chris Sale pitch on a Monday night in Arizona. And as I am literally gassing up my car to go to the game, they announced that Bryce Elder was going to be making the start
Your guy.
to give Chris Sale another 24 hours of rest. That's going to be the case once again in 25, not only with Sale and Lopez, but regardless of when Spencer Strider comes back, they're not going to want to push Strider like crazy coming off his second elbow surgery. Spencer Schwellenbach was so good last season, and he's young. I don't think they're necessarily going to want Schwellenbach to make 32 starts and throw 220 innings, including playoffs and spring training and all of that. And then, without knowing what they might add to the rotation, there's other questions too. Right? Ian Anderson, Grant Holmes, even if someone like AJ Smith-Shawver or Hurston Waldrop take a big step forward and are great, you're not going to have those guys throw 200 innings as rookies. So it's kind of my roundabout way of saying I could see the Braves kind of tapping into their depth. Maybe they won't like officially go with a 6-man rotation, but I could see a situation where they have Holmes or Anderson or Smith-Shawver kind of lingering in the bullpen in case they're needed. But then getaway day against the Marlins, Chris Sale's supposed to pitch. You have a day off the next day. You have one of those young guys throw against Miami and take your chances. And then you get another day of rest and you push everybody back.
It may not be expressly announced as a 6-man rotation, but it might be one in practice, if that makes sense. Because what you just laid out, all those times where you might want to give Sale a day. And by the way, this is more of a hobby horse for me, but unquestionably, the Braves pitching plan last season worked. Like unquestionably. I know people, sometimes I've seen this where they use what happened with the pitching staff to talk about their win-loss record. It was almost entirely because their hitting was bad last year. Their pitching plan was basically flawless. Chris Sale won the Cy Young, guys. Like they handled him absolutely perfectly. Lopez, same thing. So anyway, it doesn't mean it's going to happen again, but what they did last year clearly worked on the pitching side. So benefit of the doubt should be given on some level to that. But you're right. I mean, they have other guys, and we've banged this drum enough. We don't have to do it again in full, but they do have a bunch of these guys who are like 5th starter types that are not exciting. Even Bryce Elder. We make fun of Bryce Elder a lot. Bryce Elder is not as bad as even we probably paint him out to be sometimes. Like he's someone who can make a start for you. He's not going to absolutely get you killed. And look, Smith-Shawver and Waldrop in a lot of organizations would already be in pen in the rotation. Smith-Shawver, I know, is bad in the playoffs. He came out of nowhere, had to pitch that day. But like, he's a guy who's still 22 years old, whatever he is. Waldrop's first round pick. Like those guys might be around. Ian, Holmes, you give all those names, and we always give the number that the Braves had to use 15 starters last year. Like you're going to have to do that. But it may not be like, hey, Snit says we are running a 6-man rotation. It might just be like every time they don't have an off day, you skip somebody, and the shuttle's back and forth. Pick your AAA guy is making a start every once in a while, once or twice a month. So it may not be every single time through the rotation. I'm sure sometimes Sale's going to throw in 4 days rest, but it might be occasionally he gets a day off, an extra day, or maybe skip him entirely. That's going to happen. So there'll be flexibility. And this is, by the way, standard practice now in Major League Baseball. Most teams do not just throw the same 5 guys every 5th day. That's just not all season long. Injuries for sure, but also just like maintenance and all those things. So I think we're on the same page. It's just more of it may not be like a big flashing sign that says we are running a 6-man rotation. It might just be like, pay attention to how things are being unfolded. And you might see an extra guy in there every once in a while, especially early in the season. Pre-Strider, like it might just be chaos for like 3 weeks. It might just be Ian and Holmes and Waldrop and whoever. It might be tryouts outside of the top 3 guys for a little while.
Right. And I was curious. I Googled 6-man rotation 2025 because I swore I had seen something. And sure enough, there's a bunch of results that say the Red Sox are thinking about a 6-man rotation. The Dodgers have talked about a 6-man rotation. I think even like the Cincinnati Reds or like a team that's not supposed to be super good. We're talking about a 6-man rotation. So it's not like the Braves are the only ones thinking about it, or it would be some revolutionary change the game forever if they try to do it. But yeah, I mean, it's a long season. Games in April count the same as games in September. but you have to get to September. And if it means that you give Sale a day off, even if we do a podcast and complain about, oh my God, Bryce Elder got cooked today because they decided to give Sale an extra day of rest. If it means you're going to have your horses healthy and refreshed at the end of the season and hopefully into October, it's probably something the Braves are going to do. And even if the fan side of me kind of wants to bang my head against the table, it's something that's probably smart in the long run.
Yeah, and before we move on, I do understand, before someone yells at us, that Chris Sale got hurt at the very end of the season. I understand that happened. That was not because he was skipped every once in a while during the season. So I didn't forget that. Neither did Scott. That we know that happened at the end of the season, but that was just bad timing and something of a curse late in the season.
It was unbelievably bad timing, Brad, for a team now 3 years in a row has had the worst luck imaginable with starting pitching. 2 years ago, Strider blows his oblique, like a really uncommon injury. And he blows his oblique right before the end of the season, gets shelled in the playoffs. Max Fried had the blister pop up. Charlie Morton popped a ligament in his finger. I mean, it's like, and then Chris Sale gets back spasms for the first time in his life after being totally healthy all year. It's like, come on, man. I know that when you win a World Series, as the Braves do, you bank a whole lot of karma, all the baseball gods. You got to have the baseball gods on your side to win a World Series. But 3 years in a row now, I think the Braves handled Sale perfectly in what happens, but freaking back spasms take him out of the playoffs. It's just come on, man. We're now far enough away from the World Series that the Braves are due some good fortune in September and October.
Yeah, maybe the cycle is now passed where the Braves could be lucky again. All right, last question before we get out of here on a Saturday afternoon podcast comes from Wyatt, who says, I wanted you guys to weigh in on your preference between relief pitcher, starting pitcher, shortstop, and outfield when Justin talked about it on the podcast. How would you prioritize those four needs if you could only make one real addition? So if you missed this, Justin picked relief pitcher, and spoiler alert, I don't agree with Justin on this, which is fine. We weren't going to cut him off either and have a whole debate about it. We were trying to interview Justin. It was a long podcast. That's why I didn't jump in at that point in time. I think Scott would probably agree with me. But I knew someone was going to ask about this, and we got the question. So you're up first, Scott. I already gave my spoiler. That's not reliever for me, but where would your priority be if you could pick one to fix of those four?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we asked two guys on the Braves beat, and I almost think that Grant and Justin's orders were reversed, which is kind of funny. And
it seemed like to me anyway,
Yeah, and you know what? Frankly, that probably means that all three are very legitimate needs, and let's hope that the Braves are not in a financial situation where they can only add one of these three positions and then have to, sign a reliever for $2 million or sign another platoon bat for the outfield or whatever the situation might be. For me, I would take starting pitcher. I think it is probably the most important spot for this team because we saw last year a good rotation can carry a dreadful offense. And, man, you just have to bank, I think, on the Braves not running into historic bad injury luck once again next season. And the fact this team won 89 games last season with a terrible lineup that had Orlando Arcia batting fifth and, career worst years for some guys and injuries and all of that, I would add a starting pitcher. I think it just gives you so many more outs and flexibility to navigate 162. Maybe the Braves don't feel the same way. Maybe they feel like they have enough internally and are confident that Strider is going to be healthy. But I would counter that, man, something happens, God forbid, to Chris Sale, or Strider is not himself, or even Lopez or Schwellenbach get banged up. You very quickly only have two or three guys in the rotation you feel good about. And every year, the Braves lose somebody in the rotation to injuries. I feel like you're kind of playing fate with the baseball gods if you don't add a starting pitcher here. So that would be my order, probably starter, then outfielder, then reliever. But I did think Justin brought up very good points about how thin this bullpen could be. I mean, you want to play the injury game. What if Raisel Iglesias gets hurt? uh-oh.
Yeah.
Like capital letters, uh-oh. So yeah, I mean, I think I want all of them addressed, Brad.
Yeah,
is what I
of
want.
course. No, that makes sense, and we agree. And look, we were banging the drum before it was cool, as the way I'll put it, about starting pitcher. Even if Strider had been back opening day with no issues, I still think they need to start a pitcher, and I still believe that now. We even made the argument this winter that maybe they even need two. I think it's probably going to be one based on what we've seen so far, but hey, could change. But I think I would probably. I'm having this internal debate right now about whether I'm going to say outfield or starter first. It's not reliever. I think I have reliever third of that list, only because of our longstanding belief, and I still feel it now, that relievers are just very volatile in general, and bullpens can be hit and miss. Like, they still need help there. The loss of Jimenez is big. It should not be understated. But I think if I had to prioritize the value of those three positions, I'm tempted to say outfield because it's an everyday spot, and that's the consistency of that would be very helpful. I think I might ultimately land with you on starting pitcher for one tiebreaker reason, and that is that it is much easier. And it's my experience watching this stuff at trade deadlines, I think you have as well. It's easier to paper over a corner outfield spot than it is a rotation spot, especially at the deadline. For instance, pitching is always expensive to trade for in July. It just is.
Yeah.
We've seen Alex. Now, granted, it's not sustainable to do this every year, but the 2021 outfield was entirely remade on the fly with bargain basement moves. Like, you can find an outfielder on the market in July. Someone will be selling a corner outfielder you can trade for. You can't have that same guarantee as starting pitcher unless you're paying a big time premium. So if it's all close, I might lean to that, because we know, and Justin said it too on the show what they did with us, Alex always sets aside his little piggy bank to go make moves at the deadline. By the way, I think that's smart. People get frustrated with that. I think that's very smart, because you're gonna have an issue that you have to address at the deadline, almost certainly. So if you have no money, if your bosses say your number is this, and you're already up against that number and you have no flexibility, like, you're kind of SOL at that point in time. Or if you have that contingency plan, you build it in. So I think it's close. I think it's defensible to say any of the three spots. I think I might lean to starting pitcher just because of that. I think it might be easier to fix the other spots for cheaper later on. But I get any of the arguments. I think Justin, while I would have reliever last of the three, he made a good case. I think Grant made a good case. You made a good case. Like, fix all three is the right answer. But also, if you can only pick one, that's the question. I think I probably just, so slightly lean to pitching, but not by a lot. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's close. And, the outfield, we talked about, what if there's an injury in the rotation? What if there's an injury to Iglesias?
Dude,
what if there's another injury?
I was going to say, if Michael Harris gets hurt, all bets are off, everybody. That won't be good. And obviously Ronnie too, but Harris is the one that you are expecting to be there from the first day of the season. Whereas Ronnie, we know, is not going to be there for a while. We know that going in. Now, there's that great no, but the Braves are banking on that. We've heard them say that now multiple times. If something happens to Michael Harris, you're probably playing a guy who can't hit the baseball in center field. Whoever you find, you can probably find somebody that can play defense in center field. That guy probably can't hit. So it's anyway. Kelenic can play there, I understand, but whatever.
Yeah, or you're right. Like, Jared Kelenic could play center, and he is one of those wild cards. A little bit of an adventure for him defensively in center field last year. Yeah, I think he was fine overall.
He's a corner outfielder. He can fake it there, which is more than most guys can do, honestly. The fact that he can do that is not a small thing. It actually does add value for Kelenic, but you're right. He's not Michael Harris in center field.
Right, and if we hope that Kelenic takes a step forward, but what if he doesn't? What if he's striking out in a third of his plate appearances, and other than running into an occasional home run, he's giving you nothing offensively, and you have he has to play center field because nobody else can, and then you're filling in left field, and God, let's hope Acuna's healthy and right. So again, I mean, every team in baseball has these same injury concerns, but as we sit here with about a month before pitchers show up to Florida, I think it's clear that there are three very real needs. And I mean, heck, in the comments on YouTube or tweet us or whatever, tell us your order is. What would you prioritize? If you had a budget of $25 million, what would you target? Who would you target? I think it's an interesting discussion, and I guess the fact that we're here in mid-January and none of those questions after 2+ months of off season have passed and we still don't have answers to them is, it's been painful, but let's, for the sake of everyone, Brad, let's hope that we get answers soon in the next couple of days and weeks.
Yeah, and we're still even glossing over shortstop because I think we're all kind of resigned to that one. We're not really even including that one on the list, but I know how Scott feels about that.
Yeah.
So just wanted we didn't forget about shortstop. I promise you, everybody. It's just that we're kind of more resigned to that one not being fixed. I think it's going to be RCA if I had to guess right now. But hey, maybe Alex will shock us all and make a trade for a shortstop because, or by the way, Hassan Kim still available.
Yeah,
still out there.
If it is Orlando Arcia, please, for the love of God, let's hope the new hitting coach Tim Hires can work some magic and at least turn Orlando into a serviceable, more 2023 type of player than this past year. Because if it's 2024 all over again, I might cease to exist by mid-May.
Just get him back to a 90 WRC plus. That's all I ask. Not even 100. Give me 90. Give me a slightly below average hitter. That's all you need from Orlando Arcia. Bat him 9th. We'll be fine. All right, Scott, that's a podcast on a Saturday afternoon. Before we sign off here, anything to plug on your end? And if we have new listeners, I'm sure we have somebody new to the podcast. Where can they find you and all of your Indianapolis Colts rants on Twitter?
Yeah, I have very random sports alliances, Brad. 2024 was not a great sports year for me, just full stop across the board. So hopefully better times ahead in my sports fandom. But no, a big thank you to everybody for tuning in. We continue to have a lot of great support for the show, even in the slowest and quietest of moments this winter. So yeah, if you happen to miss either of those shows with Grant or Justin, be sure to check them out because none of it has changed. And as we always do, we'll continue rolling out shows here in the weeks to come, and hopefully spring training will be here before we know it. I am at Scott Coleman 55 on socials if you want to follow along there.
Yes, please follow Scott. I am at BT Rowland on Twitter /X and Blue Sky and all those kind of places. We are as a podcast at Hammer Territory on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc. We'd like to do coverage all year round. Some podcasts go dark in the winter. We could have done that this winter so far and would have been probably okay, but we're not doing that.
We could have not done a single show since like mid-November and be like, all right, Brad, nothing to talk about. Let's keep rolling. Let's do a mailbag.
Hey, listen, part of our appeal, Scott, is that we're sickos and we don't go away for any length of time. So please subscribe to the podcast. If you're new to the show, hopefully we convince you on this episode to smash the subscribe button on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. If you want to watch us, that's always great. And as Scott said, please leave comments as well. Like the video as you're watching it. We'll take it all. And we'll have more content coming up soon. We don't know exactly when, but I'm sure in the next few days we'll have new, fresh content on the podcast feed. So please stay tuned for that. For Scott, I am Brad, and we'll sign up right now. Thanks much, everybody. We appreciate it, and we'll see you all next time.